So I spent an embarrassing amount of time analyzing every single death in the Terrifier franchise by how much physical pain they actually caused. And honestly, I need therapy now. Yeah, we're ranking all 56 deaths from least to most painful. And spoiler alert, the #1 spot is so brutal that some people literally fainted in the theaters, including me. Let's get into it. So starting off on our completely normal and definitely not concerning tier list that we're ranking, we have an unborn baby from All Hallows Eve. Now, before you start questioning my life choices, which fair, let me explain the science here. This baby died instantly when its mother got sacrificed by some satanic cult, because apparently that's just a regular day in this franchise. Here's the thing though, from a pain perspective, this is actually the most merciful death possible. The baby had no consciousness, no developed nervous system, nothing. It's basically the same as never existing in the first place, which honestly sounds pretty good right about now. No awareness means no pain receptors firing off. No, oh, I'm dying moment. Just nothing. So yeah, in a franchise where people get sawed in half while fully awake, being an unconscious fetus is basically winning the lottery. The bar is in hell. Moving up on our delightful pain scale, we've got Smokey's wife, who managed to die completely off screen in Terrifier 3. Now that's what I call good timing. The movie doesn't even bother telling us how she died, which in Terrifier's terms means it was probably something boring and normal, since the whole point of these movies is to make the most disturbing deaths possible. Maybe it was a heart attack, slipped in the shower, got hit by a bus, I don't know. The beautiful thing about dying off screen in a horror movie is that it usually means you got a quick and easy death. There were no elaborate torture sequences, no dramatic last words, just gone. 1 minute you're Mrs. Smokey, the next you're a plot point that explains why your husband drinks too much. Honestly, she probably died peacefully in her sleep while Art was busy planning his Christmas massacre. But next up, we have 4 lucky people who died in a car crash on Halloween night in Terrifier 2. And yes, I'm calling them lucky because getting killed by a regular car accident in a Terrifier movie is basically like finding a unicorn. These folks got the premium package in these movies. Instant death on impact. No time to process what's happening, no extended suffering. Just 1 second you're driving along thinking about Halloween candy, the next second you're meeting God. The brain doesn't even have time to register pain before everything shuts down permanently. Now, you might think dying in a car crash sounds awful, but when your other options include getting your face peeled off by a guy in mime makeup, suddenly that steering wheel to the chest doesn't seem so bad. These 4 basically hit the jackpot in the worst possible lottery. Their biggest complaint would probably be missing Halloween, which is pretty mild considering the alternatives. And speaking of alternatives, here we have Smokey himself, who got exactly 1 bullet to the brain from Art's pistol. It was clean, simple, and effective. There was no muss, no fuss, just professional grade assassination from a clown. The thing about bullets to the head is that they're basically the express lane to the afterlife. If you didn't know, your brain controls everything, including feeling pain. So when that gets destroyed instantly, you're done before your nervous system can even know what hit it. Smokey probably felt less pain than you do when you stub your toe. What is really ironic is that Art actually showed some mercy here, which is weird because mercy isn't really his thing. Maybe he was having an off day, or maybe he just wanted to get to the bar's other customer faster. Either way, Smokey won the death lottery by getting shot instead of, well, literally anything else Art could have done with those hands of his. 1 bang, lights out, problem solved, almost professional really. Now we get to the 5 kids who opened Art's special Christmas presents that were explosively fun to say the least. Corey, Sara, and her mom, some guy named Bill, and the security guard who was probably just trying to do his job. These are the names of all the people that died. Death by explosion is actually pretty merciful in the grand scheme of things if you don't live from it. 1 second you're unwrapping what you think is a gift, the next second you're particles in the air. Shockwave hits you faster than your brain can process anything, so there's no, oh no, I'm about to die moment. You're just dead. Sure, there might be a split second of, that is not a sweater, that is a bomb when opening the boxes, but then boom, done, you're dead. But those quick deaths were just Art warming up because they get a lot worse after here. Well, this is kind of awkward because our next death is Art himself, because Art actually ends his own life in the first movie, which raises some questions about my research. Should I feel bad for the guy who's been murdering everyone? Probably not, but here we are, we're talking about it. So Art gets cornered by cops at the end of the first movie and decides to eat a bullet rather than face the music, which is a smart move because I don't think Art's the type of guy that would last in prison. Maybe not. Or maybe he would actually. He might make the big guy his like prison boyfriend. I don't know. Anyways, the gun goes in his mouth, kaboom, his brain gets redecorated across the wall behind him. Now, here's the weird part. Art chose the most painless way to go. For a guy who spends the whole movie torturing people in the most creative ways possible, he gives himself like the fastest death possible, which isn't really on brand. Which is kind of disappointing really. All that build up and he takes one of the least painful ways out. But moving on, Barbara Shaw in Terrifier 2 gets the award for the worst timing in horror movie history. She's just sitting in her car, probably thinking about grocery shopping or whatever moms think about, when Art shows up with a shotgun and turns her head into abstract art. The blast hits her face before she even knows what's happening. If you haven't played Fortnite, shotguns at close range do not mess around. They delete whatever they hit. Her brain got destroyed faster than she could process the sound of the gun going off, which is kind of merciful when you think about it. You know what's really wild? This might be one of the fastest kills in the entire franchise. There is no drawn out torture, no creative dismemberment, just point and click. Barbara went from normal Tuesday to I'm dead in less time than it takes to blink. Her death was so quick the movie barely has time to show it. Blink and you might miss the whole thing. Despite the mashed potatoes. You'll remember the mashed potatoes. Now let's move on to the next death, the unnamed Good Samaritan in All Hallows Eve. This poor guy made the classic horror movie mistake of trying to be a hero. He stops to help what he thinks is a stranded woman, and Art shoots him through the eye. No good deed goes unpunished, especially in Terrifier movies. Now, getting shot in the eye sounds terrible, but it probably stung for about half a second. But then the bullet hits the brain, and then that's game over. The eye has tons of nerves, so there's probably a quick flash of ow before everything went dark permanently. What kills me is that this guy was probably feeling good about himself for stopping to help. Maybe he was thinking about how he'd tell his wife about being a good Samaritan later. Instead, he got a bullet sandwich from a clown. The moral of your story? Mind your own damn business. Then call AAA instead to help someone. Moving on, let's talk about Tara, and she spent most of the first Terrifier movie playing hide and seek with Art, which just sounds exhausting. All that running around just to get shot in the head multiple times at the end. Talk about anticlimactic. Honestly, this death really pissed me off in the first movie because I just feel like Art is not the type of person that should be allowed to have a gun in like the lore. All the other deaths are like super intense, super grotesque, and he just whips out a gun from nowhere. It felt like cheating the whole plot of the movie. I can't feel like I'm the only one who thought this. It was incredibly anticlimactic. If anything could change for that first movie, that would be it. But here's the thing, after watching her friend Dawn get the full Art treatment earlier, getting shot was probably a relief. The first bullet did the job. Everything after that was just Art being extra. Her brain was shut down before she could register what was happening. It's almost funny how normal her death is compared to everyone else's. There's no sawing, no skinning, no creative body horror, just bullets. Yep. Lucky for Tara, she got to skip the torture portion of the program and jump straight to the end credits. And in this franchise, that counts as a win. Now let's move on to Mrs. Sheila Thompson from Terrifier 2. Poor Mrs. Thompson walked in on her daughter's mutilated body, probably thought she was having the worst day ever. Then Art showed up and made it officially the worst day ever by chopping her head clean off. Don't worry, we're gonna talk about her daughter later, but much later. The good news though is decapitation works fast. One solid swing and you're done. She probably felt the blade for maybe a second or two before her spinal cord got severed and the lights went out. Blood stops flowing to your brain pretty much instantly, so there's no drawn out suffering. Art turned her head into a candy bowl afterwards. What the f? But she was already gone by then, so at least she didn't have to see all of this humiliation. Getting your head cut off sounds terrible, but when your other option is getting tortured for 10 minutes and then getting salt literally rubbed in your wound, it's not the worst way to go. Yeah, these deaths were quick, but the rest, they're not as fortunate. Let's talk about Eddie the bartender from Terrifier 3. Eddie thought he was being tough when he confronted Art at the bar. Turns out confronting a psychotic clown when you're just trying to serve drinks was not his best career move. So Art shot him in the neck, which is nastier than a headshot because your brain stays alive while your body starts shutting down. Eddie would have felt that bullet tear through his throat, which would have been a burning, ripping pain as it severed major blood vessels. So in layman's terms, not very fun. And the worst part, he had a few seconds to realize he was dying. His throat would have filled with blood, making it impossible to breathe or call for help. It would have just been gurgling in panic as his blood pressure dropped. Within maybe 10 seconds, he would have been unconscious from the blood loss, but those 10 seconds were rough. Eddie went from, "Hey buddy, you need to leave," to bleeding out on the floor faster than you could order a beer. Maybe you shouldn't have been a bartender, buddy. Now let's move on to Maurice Mo Jackson. Mo was just trying to fix some pipes when possessed Victoria decided to redecorate his neck with a glass shard. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong movie to be a maintenance worker in. A chunk of glass to the jugular burns worse than you'd think. Sharp glass cuts clean, but it also tears on the way in, which means more nerve damage and more pain. Mo felt that shard slice through his throat, then Victoria kept stabbing him to make sure he stayed down. The multiple stabs probably helped him die faster, which sounds backwards but makes sense. More holes means more blood loss. That's quick maths. Still, those first few stabs would have been pure agony, because your throat has a ton of nerve endings that all started screaming at once. Mo probably thought he was having a bad day going to this creepy house before this happened. Now, getting to deal with a nasty clogged toilet doesn't seem so terrible, does it? But now let's move on to Officer Evans. Officer Evans made the mistake of investigating a morgue where Art's headless body was chilling. Spoiler alert, the body wasn't as dead as it looked. Evans then gets strangled and decapitated by Art's reanimated corpse, which is both weird and gross. We don't really see it happen, but considering Art later wears the guy's head around, I'm pretty sure he died. If you didn't know, getting strangled hurts. Your throat gets crushed, you can't breathe, and there's this awful pressure in your head as blood flow gets cut off. Evans probably struggled for maybe 30 seconds or more before passing out from lack of oxygen. And then Art ripped his head off, but Evans was likely already gone by then. The decapitation was just Art being extra, which is pretty on brand at this point. The real insult was Art using Evans' head later to mess with people. Even in death, this guy couldn't catch a break. Now let's go back to Terrifier 1 to talk about Steve. Good old Steve. Steve kicked Art out of his pizza place for being a weird, gross creep and smearing poop on the walls. I do not get why Art did this. That was just nasty, which is probably the right call from a health department standpoint, but a terrible call from a staying alive standpoint. Art then comes back and chops Steve's head off with a cleaver, and then carves his face into a jack-o'-lantern because Art is a festive motherfucker. The first cleaver hit probably hurt like hell. Your body would register this massive trauma before your brain could even process what was happening. But cleavers are heavy and sharp, so Steve probably died within a few seconds of that first chop. Any additional chopping was just Art being thorough, and we know, because it's Art, there was lots of additional chopping. The face carving would have happened after Steve was already dead. Thankfully, having your face turned into Halloween decorations would be insulting enough without having to feel it happen. I don't know what Steve was thinking, but he probably was not very happy about working at a pizza place that night. Let's go back to Terrifier 3 and talk about Mark. Mark gets the honor of being one of Art's opening acts in Terrifier 3. Nothing says a Merry Christmas like a hatchet to the face from a guy in a Santa suit. Art went to town on Mark with that hatchet, and the first hit was definitely the worst. A hatch to the skull or neck delivers massive trauma instantly, crushing bone, severing nerves, causing your brain to basically blue screen from the damage. Mark probably felt that first strike as this explosion of pain. Then everything went fuzzy as his brain started shutting down from the injury. Art then kept chopping, but Mark was likely unconscious after the first or second hit. His wife unfortunately had to watch this whole thing happen, which makes it worse for everyone involved except Art, who was clearly having the time of his life. So Mark went from dad opening Christmas presents to a corpse in under a minute. Not that bad of a way to go in this franchise, unfortunately, because we're not even halfway through, because getting hacked up quickly beats what happened to these next victims. Let's talk about Juliet Thomas from Terrifier 3. Art decides to play Santa for the Thomas family, and little Juliet got the world's worst Christmas present. She was killed off screen with the same hatchet that got her dad, which is both terrible and merciful at the same time. Since we don't actually see it happen, there's a good chance Art just ended it quickly while she was sleeping. If you didn't know, kids' bodies go into shock faster than adults, so even if she woke up, unconsciousness would hit almost immediately. The fact that the movie doesn't actually show us this death means Art had a rare moment of efficiency, or the filmmakers decided there were some lines that wouldn't be crossed. I'm guessing it's the second because usually society doesn't f with kids dying on TV. So getting killed in your sleep by a fake Santa is horrible, but from a pain perspective, she skipped the whole realizing you're about to die part. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, especially when everything else is the alternative in this list that we're talking about. Let's now continue talking about Terrifier 3 and talk about the Unnamed Art Cosplayer. Someone thought dressing up as Art the Clown for Halloween would be a fun idea. That person was wrong. Very, very wrong. We only see this guy's bloody costume afterwards, so whatever happened was quick enough that the movie didn't bother filming it. In horror movie logic, that usually means you get the express treatment rather than the deluxe torture package. Maybe he got stabbed, maybe he got his neck snapped, maybe Art just looked at him and he died from embarrassment. Who knows? The important thing is that it happened fast enough that we don't get a whole scene about it, but we know it happened. There's something darkly funny about getting killed while dressed as your own killer. It's like wearing a kick me sign, except the sign says murder me and the person reading it is a clown. Does that analogy make any sense? No. Am I gonna go with it? Yes. Now let's talk about a tragic death in my opinion. The Possum. Yes, I'm ranking a possum death, and no, I don't feel weird about it. Art disemboweled this little possum, which sounds gross, but this was over pretty fast for the animal. Possums are small, so their blood volume is tiny compared to humans. When Art sliced this one open, it would have bled out in seconds rather than minutes. Animals also go to shock a lot faster than people do, which means their pain response shuts down quicker. The initial cut would have hurt like hell in possum terms. That's like at least 3 squeaks of possum pain, if anyone can translate possum to human. What makes this worse than all the human deaths above is that the possum was so innocent. I mean, a lot of the humans were too, but it's a possum. It was just being a possum in the wrong possum place at the wrong possum time. You'd think a guy so mean to humans would have a heart for animals or something. There's gotta be a limit, right? No? Well, okay. Let's now talk about Vicky Hayes. Vicky survived the first movie, but came back in the third one as Art's possessed sidekick. Or side chick, because I don't know, there's a lot of weird things that happen in this movie. Yeah, Sienna finally puts her out of her misery though with a sword through the chest and face. Getting stabbed through the heart stops you pretty much instantly. Your brain needs oxygenated blood to function, and when your heart gets punctured, that supply ends real quick. The sword through the mouth was just Sienna making sure the job was done. Vicky would have felt that sword punch through her chest, which causes a deep crushing pain as the blade breaks ribs and pierces organs. But within heartbeats, literally, she was unconscious from blood loss. Decapitation that followed was just cleanup work. Vicky would have been already gone by then. So yeah, getting mercy killed by the hero beats getting tortured by Art. So this was actually Vicky's best case scenario given where she'd ended up in life. Let's now move on to the little pale girl and when she dies in Terrifier 3. This creepy demon kid got the same sword treatment as Vicky since they were basically sharing a body at that point. It's hard to say if demons feel pain in the same way humans do, but let's assume that they do. Same sword, same technique, same result. The blade went through her chest and then took her head off in one swing. Even if demon pain works differently, having your heart destroyed and your head removed tends to diagnose people with death. What's interesting is that she seemed to enjoy most of the violence throughout the movie, so maybe pain doesn't bother her the same way. It could be that getting stabbed felt good to her, which is a disturbing thought. Either way, Sienna ended her in seconds rather than minutes. There was no drawn out exorcism scene. There was no lengthy demon banishing ritual. It's just sword going stabby and then it's dead. Sometimes the direct approach works best, even with supernatural entities who laugh at regular violence. Now we're entering the realm though where people actually suffered before they started dying. Let's talk about when Art the Clown got decapitated in Terrifier 2. So Sienna finally got fed up with Art's nonsense and chopped his head off with her dad's magic sword. Looking back now, this is kind of her go-to move, you know? Anyways, Art felt that blade slice through his neck for maybe about half a second before his spinal cord got severed and all communication between his brain and body just stopped. Decapitation is actually pretty efficient. Once that connection is cut, you're done. But the irony here is beautiful. Art spends 2 whole movies at this point torturing people in the most elaborate ways possible, but then gets taken out by one clean sword swing. There's no creativity, no drawn out suffering, just whoosh and his head rolls away. Of course though, Art being Art, he doesn't stay dead. His head comes back to life in the credits because apparently even death has a return policy in these movies. I mean, hey, We gotta get sequels, we gotta make some money. We can't do that with our clown guy dead. I'm not even bashing the director Damien Leone for this. These are great movies. Your clown can come back as much as you want as long as these movies are good. Yeah, karma's weird sometimes. Let's now move on to Tia from All Hallows Eve. So now, you might not have seen All Hallows Eve if you're not a super fan of Art the Clown, but this is actually where his first appearance was. Well, technically, it was from a short film a long time ago that got put into All Hallows Eve as one of the tapes, but never mind. I'm the nerd, you're not, you're learning from me, that's why you're watching this video. Anyways, Tia was this little girl just trying to sleep when Art decided to make her part of his twisted babysitter prank. He decapitates a child. Yeah, at least this happens off screen because seeing this on screen would be traumatizing. Anyways, this is both horrible and the best thing that could have happened given the circumstances. Since we don't see it, Art probably just took her head off in one go while she was unconscious. You know, kids sleep heavy, and if you're going to get murdered by a clown, doing it while you're asleep beats being awake for the experience. One clean cut, and she never knew what happened. There's no time to be scared, no time to feel pain. Just sleep one moment and gone the next. Art left her head as a present for the babysitter to find, which is psychotic, but at least Tia didn't have to see the babysitter's reaction. You know, small mercies in a world where a guy in clown makeup is running around collecting heads. Literally. Now let's move on to her brother, Timmy, because Timmy got the exact same treatment as his sister Tia, head removal via Art's special delivery service, aka his head getting cut off. You know, at least they were together when they died, which is either sweet or deeply disturbing depending on how you look at it. Another off-screen decapitation means another quick death. Art wasn't interested in waking the kids up for some elaborate torture session. He just handled his business and moved on to terrorizing the babysitter. 2 kids, 2 quick cuts, 2 heads for his collection. Art was clearly operating on an efficiency mode that night rather than his usual creative torture approach. Timmy and Tia never saw it coming, but the babysitter got the real torture. She had to walk into that scene and realize what had happened while she was downstairs. Sometimes the people who live suffer more than the ones who die, which Art definitely exploits and uses to his advantage. Speaking more about All Hallows Eve though, let's talk about Caroline from the Something in the Dark segment. Caroline had the misfortune of being in a segment about alien encounters, which honestly sounds like it should be less painful than dealing with Art. Aliens are usually more advanced, right? Maybe they have better killing technology? I don't know. We know absolutely nothing about how she dies because it happens off screen, and the movie doesn't really care enough to tell us. Could have been alien ray guns, could have been probing gone wrong, could have been death by superior technology that we can't even comprehend. The upside of alien murder is that advanced civilizations probably have very efficient ways to end things. There was none of this medieval torture nonsense that Art loves so much. Caroline might have gotten vaporized, or mind wiped, or transported to another dimension where she just stopped existing. Any of those beats getting sawed in half by a guy who learned his techniques from YouTube tutorials on medieval execution methods. Sometimes not knowing how someone died is better than knowing everything. Now let's move on to Mike the Exterminator from Terrifier 1. Mike thought he was just doing regular pest control until he became the pest that needed controlling. Art knocked him out with a hammer to the skull and then came back later to stomp his head into paste. That first hammer blow was brutal. Blunt force trauma to the head causes your brain to bounce around inside your skull like a bouncy ball, which hurts exactly as much as it sounds, but it also knocked Mike unconscious, so he was out cold when Art came back for the finishing move. Getting your head stomped while you're already unconscious is about as merciful as this franchise can get, besides cutting someone's head off. Mike didn't get to fully feel his skull cave in or his brain get squished. He was already pretty much gone and just riding the concussion express train to brain death. Stomp was just Art making sure the job was done. There was no artistry, no creativity, it was just basic brutality applied with foot pressure. Sometimes simple works best, even for a psychotic clown. Now these next set of deaths hurt more, but they're nothing compared to what's coming at the end of the video, because we're not even halfway through. Let's now talk about the unnamed gas station attendant from All Hallows Eve. Working the night shift at a gas station already sucks, but this guy had to deal with Art vandalizing his bathroom and then turning him into human confetti. This definitely was not in the job description. Art used a hacksaw to cut this poor guy into pieces, and we only see the aftermath, which tells us the cutting part wasn't meant to be the entertainment. It was just efficiency. A hacksaw tears tears through flesh differently than a smooth blade does. Each back and forth motion rips rather than slices, creating a jagged wound that hits more nerve endings, meaning the attendant would have felt every stroke as the saw teeth caught and pulled. But Art likely killed him first with a quick throat cut or stab, and then did the dismembering afterwards for practical reasons. Moving body parts is easier than moving whole bodies, especially when you're decorating your crime scene. Smart planning, terrible execution. Well, good execution, but terrible clown stuff. Now let's move on to Seth Bolton from Terrifier 2. Seth was minding his own business at the morgue when Art's corpse woke up and decided to redecorate. Nothing ruins your night shift quite like the dead guy attacking you with surgical instruments. Art slit Seth's throat first, which creates immediate panic. Your throat would fill with blood and breathing would become impossible. And there's this burning pain as the blade cuts through cartilage and muscle. Seth had maybe 10 seconds of choking in his own blood before the real fun started though. Then Art grabbed a small hammer and started playing whack-a-mole with Seth's skull. Each hit would have sent shockwaves through his head, except by this point, blood loss from the throat wound was making everything fuzzy. The hammer blows would have finished what the throat cut started. Seth's brain got pulverized, but at least he was already dying from the neck injury. Art just wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any last-minute heroics. It was very thorough work, really. Now let's talk about how Art the Clown killed a rat with liquid nitrogen in Terrifier 3. Well, Art dunked the rat in the stuff and turned it into a ratsicle, which is creative but also scientifically fascinating. Liquid nitrogen is cold enough to freeze your skin instantly, and the moment it hit the rat's body, its nerve endings would have screamed in pain, except they froze before they could finish screaming. Freezing death sounds peaceful in movies, but the first few seconds are pure agony. Your skin would burn from the cold and then go completely numb as the tissue dies. The rat would have felt its body shutting down section by section until its core temperature dropped enough to kill it. Death by freezing beats death by fire any day, because at least the pain stops when everything goes numb. It's a small comfort when you're becoming a corpsicle, but still. Now let's move on to Michael Shaw, who's Sienna's father, and his death that we saw in Terrifier 2. Michael wasn't even killed by Art. He was just killed by a regular old car accident plus electrocution. Sometimes the boring world is dangerous enough to without adding psychotic clowns to the mix. Anyways, his car hit a power transformer, which means thousands of volts went through his body all at once. High voltage electricity basically turns your nervous system into a bad LSD trip, except instead of pretty colors, you get every muscle in your body violently screaming at you it's in pain at the same time. Michael would have felt like he was being punched by lightning from the inside. His heart would have stopped immediately from the electrical interference, but his brain would have stayed conscious for a few more seconds while the electricity cooked his internal organs. Electrocution kills fast, but those first few moments are intense. Have you ever been shocked by something before? It hurts like a mother. One time I was plugging in something to an outlet and I accidentally had my pinky finger in between the two prongs when I was a kid. My entire finger was black and blue afterwards because it got cooked. Because every nerve fires at once, creating pain signals that your brain can't even process properly. Then your heart gives up and everything goes dark. But at least it would have been quicker than anything Art would have had planned for him. Now let's move on to the unnamed cult woman from All Hallows Eve. This woman got sacrificed by the satanic cult in the most boring way possible, off screen and without any details. Even Satan's followers were more considerate than Art when it came to execution efficiency. Ritual killings usually involve quick throat cuts or heart stabs because the cultists want fresh blood for their ceremony. They don't want a torture victim. This woman likely got a blade across the neck or through the chest and felt a sharp burst of pain and then bled out within minutes. Religious fanatics might be crazy, but they're pretty goal-oriented crazy. They needed her dead for their ritual, not suffering for their entertainment. It's much more professional than Art. Literally, they just see the killing as a means to an end. The cult would have probably held her down, said some spooky Latin words, and to be honest, Latin is pretty scary, so I get it, and then made one clean cut and waited for her to die. Sometimes boring is better, as we're starting to learn, but the next couple deaths, they're anything but boring. Starting with Sara, the other cult victim from All Hallows Eve. Basically, she died the exact same way as the first one. We don't really get to see it, so I'm not going to dwell too much longer on it. Let's talk about Will the Exterminator. Will is the other Exterminator in the first Terrifier movie. He showed up to help his buddy Mike and instead walked into Art's one-man horror show. The good news is Art killed him from behind, so Will never saw it coming. The bad news is everything else about this situation. A knife to the back of the skull is weird territory pain-wise. Your brain doesn't have pain receptors. but getting there requires going through your scalp, skull, and all the stuff that definitely does hurt. Will would have felt that blade punch to the back of his head for maybe a couple seconds before his brain got scrambled. Then Art switched to a machete and took Will's head clean off. What is with this guy taking people's heads off? By this point, Will was either dead or so close to it that the decapitation was just paperwork. His brain was already damaged from the knife, so he wasn't processing much. So yeah, Art went from 0 to overkill in about 5 seconds, which is par from the course at this point. Let's now talk about Kristen from All Hallows Eve, the 9th Circle. Kristen had the misfortune of meeting the Pig Man, who chopped her hand off with a cleaver and then immediately killed her with the same tool. What the f? If you haven't done it before, losing a hand is unbelievably painful. All of those nerves, bones, and tendons getting severed at once creates this explosion of pain that travels up your arm and into your brain. Kristen would have screamed, gone into shock, and started bleeding everywhere. But the Pig Man didn't let her suffer long. He brought that cleaver down again and finished the job with a killing blow to her torso. The initial hand injury would have hurt like hell for a couple seconds, but then the fatal strike ended everything. Literally, the Pig Man did not need to cut off her hand. That was completely just to make her suffer, which is why this is so high on the list. Ultimately, though, we learned that this cult wasn't interested in torture, just elimination. They needed Kristen dead for their ritual, and a hand chop followed by execution got the job done efficiently. So yeah, 2 swings, 2 different types of pain, 1 dead Kristen. Now let's talk about Emily Crane from Terrifier 2. Emily exists only as a newspaper clipping mentioning that she was killed by Art sometime before the events of Terrifier 2. We know nothing about how she died, which could mean anything from a bullet to the head or getting turned into human origami. But since the movie doesn't elaborate, I'm going to assume Art hadn't perfected all of the crazy torture techniques that we see in Terrifier 2 yet. Maybe this is back when he was still figuring out his whole brand, and Emily got a more straightforward death. Could have been stabbing, shooting, strangulation, sawed in half, or any number of basic murder methods. The fact that it's not highlighted as a spectacular kill suggests it was probably routine by Art's standards. You know, Emily might have gotten lucky and died during Art's amateur hour, but seeing as it probably happened after the events of Terrifier 1, it was probably more gruesome than those deaths. Now let's talk about Ricky from Terrifier 2 as well. Ricky tried to kick Art out of his costume shop and learned that customer service has its limits. Art responded by ramming a broken bottle into Ricky's eye and then introducing his head to his girlfriend, Mrs. Cleaver. Getting glass shoved into your eyeball is painful if you didn't know. Eyes have more nerve endings per square inch than almost anywhere else on your body. So that bottle would have felt like an explosion going off in Ricky's face. The glass probably went straight into his brain, which would cause immediate neurological damage. But Art wasn't done just yet. He grabbed a cleaver and started hacking away at Ricky's skull till the head came off completely, because it's Art the Clown, and taking people's heads off is just par for the course. The eye injury might have stunned Ricky enough that he didn't feel the cleaver work, but if you're gonna ask me, he definitely felt it. This hurt pretty bad. Either way, Art made sure that there was no chance of survival. There were no half measures, just complete head removal for his window display. But from here on out, these deaths get even more messed up, so if you puke easy from blood, probably best to turn away now. Let's now talk about Sienna Shaw and when she died in Terrifier 2. Now you might be saying, Chupacabro, she's in Terrifier 3. How is she dead? Well, she actually came back to life at the end of Terrifier 2. That's like a giant plot point, but it's kind of messy, so I don't blame you if you don't know that. Our main character, Sienna, gets stabbed in the gut and then drowns. But she comes back to life because apparently her dad's sword is magical. Because of course it is. That sword going into her stomach would have felt like getting punched by a red-hot poker. Internal organs don't have many pain receptors, but everything around them sure do. Sienna would have felt this deep, crushing agony spreading through her abdomen. Then she would have fallen into this water and drowned, which is more panic than pain. It's terrifying, but it's not a sharp pain. It's more like suffocating while your chest bursts from lack of oxygen. But the supernatural resurrection probably healed all the damage, so Sienna skipped the whole dying slowly from eternal bleeding part. Lucky her, most people don't get to do that because they don't have magical daddy swords. Anyways, though, she definitely felt all that pain, but then was brought back to life to probably get killed again in a later movie, so she'll probably be in a future video like this soon. Let's now talk about Monica Brown from the first Terrifier movies. Monica was just trying to interview Vicky about surviving Art's rampage when Vicky decided to give her a first-hand experience. Nothing says live television quite like having your eyeball ripped out on camera. It doesn't really make a ton of sense why Vicky does this. I guess if you watch the later movies, you could say that Art now controls her or something, but if you're just in the first one, kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. Anyways, Vicky used her thumbs to gouge Monica's eye out, which is hands down one of the worst things you can do to someone. Eyes are packed with nerves, and having them crushed feels exactly as horrible as you would imagine. Monica would have felt her eyeball burst under the pressure before the pain even had time to register properly, and then it would have been fiery pain. Vicky then kept attacking after the eye thing, probably clawing at Monica's face until she died from blood loss or shock. The whole ordeal might have lasted 30 seconds, but when someone's destroying your face with their bare hands, 30 seconds is gonna feel like a lifetime. This wasn't Art's work. This was just regular human insanity triggered by trauma, but sometimes people snap without any clown needing to get involved. Now let's talk about the Unnamed Nurse from Terrifier 3. This nurse had the worst shift of her career when Art's severed head and possessed Vicky decided to eat her face off. Hospital administration definitely doesn't cover this scenario in training. Having your face chewed off is exactly as awful as it sounds. Your face, along with your eye, like we mentioned earlier, has one of the highest concentrations of nerve endings in your body, so every bite is gonna feel like getting stung by wasps made of fire. That nurse probably screamed until her throat gave out. Art's head and Vicky tag teamed her, taking turns biting chunks of flesh off of her cheeks, lips, and forehead. Each bite would send fresh waves of agony through her head while she slowly bled to death from dozens of small wounds. The attack happened mostly off screen, but we see the aftermath. Her face is completely mangled. Death would have come when the blood vessels got severed so that she finally passed out and bled out. But this was no quick mercy kill, just gradual consumption until her body was forced to quit. Now let's talk about Jennifer Thomas from Terrifier 3. Jennifer watched Art kill her husband upstairs and then got to experience his creativity firsthand. Art worked her over with a hatchet in multiple stages. Because why end things quickly when you can be thorough? First, he chopped into her back, a hatchet blade splitting through muscle and scraping against her spine. That is immediate blinding pain as nerves get severed and bones get nicked. Jennifer probably went into shock just from that first hit. Then Art hacked off one of her arms. Amputation is almost an indescribable pain. Every nerve in that limb is going to be firing at once as bone gets crushed and tendons get ripped apart. She'd feel her arm disappearing while her brain struggled to process what was happening. Finally, he split open her stomach, spilling her gutty works onto the floor. By this point, shock was probably dulling some of the pain, but she was still conscious enough to see her own intestines falling out, which, if you didn't know, is not fun to look at. And then Art finished her while she was still looking. Now let's talk about my least favorite death in these movies, and not for the reason you're probably thinking. Let's talk about Greg and Jonathan Shaw from Terrifier 3. Sienna's uncle Greg and her brother Jonathan both got their heads removed off screen, which sucks because they're such big characters in these movies, especially Jonathan, that it almost feels wrong we didn't get to see their deaths on screen. But both these decapitations probably didn't happen too quickly, because we find their bodies later with clean cuts, suggesting Art used something sharp enough to do the job in 1 or 2 swings, but knowing Art and that this is Terrifier 3, this probably hurt like a mother. Now let's move on to Adam Burke from Terrifier 3. Adam was working security at the psychiatric facility when Art and possessed Vicky decided to give him the world's worst makeover. They ripped his jaw off and then peeled his face like a banana. You didn't know your jaw is attached to your skull with joints, muscles, and ligaments that really don't want to come apart. And when Art tore it off, every one of those connections would have snapped at once. Adam's entire head would have erupted in agony as his mandible got ripped away, taking teeth and tongue tissue with it. But no, they weren't finished, because they started peeling Adam's facial skin off in strips, which is basically the nightmare version of a face peel. Your face has a lot more nerve density than most areas of your body, so each strip that came off is going to be sending fresh waves of torture through his skull. Adam probably passed out from that much jaw trauma, which means he missed the worst part. Sometimes shock is nature's blessing, as it's basically how it stops us from experiencing extreme pain. Now let's move on to the unnamed pregnant woman from All Hallows Eve. The cult needed this woman's unborn baby for their ritual, so they sliced her belly open while she was still alive. This is a really messed up death. A knife cutting through your abdomen creates this deep, spreading burn as the blade opens skin, muscle, and fat. This woman would have felt every inch of that cut as it went deeper, knowing exactly what they were after. The physical agony combined with the horror of what was happening to her child. The cultist probably would have made one long cut across her stomach and then reached inside to complete their ritual. Blood loss from a wound that size would cause unconsciousness within a minute, but that's still 60 seconds of experiencing the worst thing imaginable. Her death would would have came from massive bleeding as her body would have shut down from trauma. At least she didn't have to see what they did to her baby afterwards though. Now let's talk about Timmy Thomas from Terrifier 3. 5-year-old Timmy was asleep on Christmas Eve when Art decided to play Santa Claus. The hatchet dismemberment happened off screen because again, this is a 5-year-old child, which is like mercy in this franchise. We don't really see it, but we get to hear it, and we know that it was quick with the first blow, maybe to the neck or the chest, and kids' bodies are smaller and more fragile, so a hatchet strike that might just wound an adult would be instantly fatal to a child. Dismemberment probably came after death though, because we couldn't hear any screaming, which means Timmy would have only felt one moment of sharp pain before everything ended. There would have been no drawn out torture, no realization of what was happening, just sleep and then a brief shock, then nothing. Now let's move on to the Unnamed Woman from All Hallows Eve. This woman survives Art's initial attack, but died later from her injuries, which means she got the worst of both worlds, surviving the torture just long enough to suffer through dying slowly. We don't know what Art did to her specifically, but she was mutilated and died from her wounds afterwards. Could have just been limbs removed, organs damaged, or just enough cuts and stabs to ensure she'd bleed out over time though. Dying from mutilation injuries means lying there for however long it takes, feeling every wound throb and burn while your body gradually shuts down. This is no quick mercy. No sudden lights out, just pain that gets worse as infection sets in and blood pressure drops. She might have lasted hours before finally dying and being conscious for most of it, knowing help was not coming. Every breath would hurt, every heartbeat would send pain signals throughout her entire body. Art left her to suffer there on purpose. Now let's talk about Santa Claus from Terrifier 3, or Chuck. Chuck got introduced to liquid nitrogen chemistry, and then Art used a hammer to shatter his frozen body parts. It's like a science experiment gone horribly wrong. If you've never touched liquid nitrogen, congratulations, you're a normal person. If you have, why? Anyways, it burns worse than fire for the first few seconds. Chuck's skin would have felt like it was being cooked as the extreme cold destroyed his tissue. Then those body parts would have went completely numb as the nerves froze solid. Art froze Chuck's arms, legs, and half of his face and then started smashing them with a hammer. Watching your own limbs crack off would be psychologically devastating, even if the frozen parts couldn't feel it anymore. The unfrozen parts of Chuck still had working nerves though, so he felt every hammer blow that missed the frozen areas. Plus, there's the trauma of seeing chunks of yourself scattered around the room. Death would have only come after Art finally hit something vital that wasn't frozen yet, but this would have lasted a while. Now we're getting to the end of this video, and yeah, these are where all the deaths start getting really nasty. Let's now talk about Brooke Valdeon from Terrifier 2. Brooke made the mistake of trying to run from Art after he'd already butchered her boyfriend Jeff. You'd think she would have learned by now that running just makes him more creative, but here we are. Art threw industrial acid in her face, which is like war crimes level of cruelty. Acid doesn't just burn, it dissolves. Each drop that hits Brooke's skin would have started eating through tissue immediately. Her face, eyes, and mouth would have gotten liquefied while she was fully conscious and screaming. The pain from acid is indescribable because it keeps getting worse. First contact feels like molten metal, and it intensifies as the chemical reaction continues. Brooke's nerve endings were being destroyed in real time, but slowly enough that she felt every second of it. But Art wouldn't have been done. While she was reeling from having her face melted off, he grabbed a spike club and started beating her with it. The nails would have drove into her arms and legs, puncturing flesh and cracking bones. Each swing would be sending those spikes deeper into her body. Art then smashed her chest so hard he cracked her ribcage open. Brooke was still alive through all of this. The acid hadn't killed her yet, it had just made her blind and disfigured, so she would have felt every nail penetrate her flesh and every bone break under the club. Finally, Art reached into her chest and ripped her heart out, because why not? If anything, this is a mercy kill, because by then Brooke had endured minutes of one of the worst pains imaginable, and her body was somehow still being kept alive. In real life, this whole thing would have lasted several minutes and it would have been pure agony. Now let's talk about the cat lady, who's the unnamed crazy woman from Terrifier. This homeless woman everyone called Cat Lady tried to show Art some maternal kindness. She cleaned him up, gave him shelter, and treated him gently. Art repaid her kindness by skinning her alive and wearing her flesh as a costume. How sweet, a man with mommy issues. Art scalped her first, peeling the skin and her hair off the top of her head in one piece. If you didn't know, your scalp has thousands of nerve endings and blood vessels, so having it ripped off hurts. The cat lady was screaming as Art tore her scalp away, leaving her skull exposed to the air. Then he cut off both of her boobs. which is insane. Breast tissue is fatty and it doesn't have as many nerves as your head, but the cutting would still hurt like hell. More importantly, these wounds bleed heavily. Art wasn't trying to kill her quickly. He wanted her alive while he collected his trophies. After taking what he needed from her for his disguise, Art left her there to die slowly. The cat lady just laid naked and mutilated, watching Art wear pieces of her body while she bled out. Her exposed skull would be throbbing with every heartbeat, and the chest wounds would have been burning as the air hit her raw flesh. She lived for several more minutes after the mutilation and was conscious enough to see Art modeling her scalp and skin. The blood loss eventually made her dizzy, then unconscious, then dead. But those final minutes were spent in unimaginable pain, watching her own body parts being worn by her killer. This is one of the most messed up deaths in my opinion, because she was nothing but nice to this creep. And then he just does that. Now let's talk about Dennis from Terrifier 3. Dennis was just trying to help out Art when Art decided to demonstrate his knowledge of human anatomy. This death involves multiple types of pain layered on top of each other, which is Art's specialty. First, Art drove a nail through Dennis's hand, hitting it to a surface. Hand injuries are notoriously painful because your palms and fingers are packed with nerve endings. That nail punching through bone and muscle would have sent lightning bolts of pain up Dennis's arm. He was stuck there, screaming, while Art was preparing for round 2. Next, Art bit off Dennis's fingers one by one from the other hand. The human bite force can crush bone when applied with psychotic determination. Dennis would have felt each finger get clamped between Art's teeth and then the bone crack and separate. The pain of having your fingers chewed off is impossible to describe because it doesn't happen to many people. It's like one of the worst injuries you can imagine multiplied by 5. But Art saved the most horrible part for last. He used a box cutter to slice the skin off Dennis's face, starting at the forehead and working down. This is just evil torture. Art then peeled Dennis's facial skin away in strips while he was still fully conscious. Again, your face has such a high concentration of nerve endings in your body. Every cut of that blade would be sending shockwaves through Dennis's head. Dennis then died during the face skinning, probably from shock or blood loss. His body would have finally given up after enduring multiple types of specialized torture designed for the maximum amount of pain. Also, this scene is like incredibly messed up because it includes Art's girlfriend doing something crazy with a piece of glass. I have to skip that part of the movie every single time because the sound effects are just too much for me. Now let's talk about Jeff. Jeff thought he was going to have a fun night out with his girlfriend Brooke. Instead, he became the star of Art's most personal and humiliating kill in the entire franchise. This death is designed to attack masculinity in the most brutal way possible. And if you're a guy watching this, you will be like, ouch, that hurts. Art stabbed Jeff 9 times in the groin with a knife. Not the stomach, not the chest, right in the balls. Each stab would have hit different parts of his ding-dongs and inner thighs. Getting kicked in the groin hurts enough to drop most men and make us puke. But imagine having that pain multiplied by having a blade punch through some of those same sensitive areas 9 separate times. First stab probably hit his balls, which has more nerve density than almost anywhere else on the entire male body. Jeff doubled over in agony, but Art wasn't finished because each additional stab would have sent fresh waves of nauseating pain through his pelvis and abdomen. By the 4th or 5th stab, Jeff was probably going to shock from the specialized trauma. Then, Art cut his ding-dong off entirely. He sliced through the base with the knife, just severing everything. Art then left Jeff to bleed out from his injuries. The blood vessels in that area are major ones for obvious reasons. So Jeff died within a couple of minutes from blood loss, but those were some of the longest minutes of his life, lying there castrated and mutilated, knowing exactly what had been taken from him. Brooke then found him just as he was dying, which just adds psychological torture to his physical agony. Now let's move on to Casey from All Hallows Eve. Casey watched the satanic cult sacrifice other victims, including a pregnant woman, before they strapped her to their altar for the grand finale. What happened to her is mostly left to our imagination, which somehow makes it worse than anything we actually see. The cult strips Casey naked and ties her down while chanting in what sounds like Latin. A demonic figure approaches, possibly Satan himself in their twisted worldview, and the screen cuts to black before we see what happens, but the implications are clear and horrifying. Based on the ritual setup, bad things are happening to Casey that I can't really talk about on YouTube, and yeah, it's pretty bad. This is also early in the whole story of Terrifier, so it was a lot wilder, I'll say. You don't really see that level of stuff in the newer movies. Like, yes, there is messed up killings, but usually it's just like messed up killings, not other stuff, if you catch my drift. But then afterwards, yeah, her death would have just come quickly, but just the whole like feeling of this death, it's just icky. It's pretty bad. Let's now move on to the unnamed costume designer from All Hallows Eve, which somehow is even worse. Someone in the costume business learned that Art takes hands-on work very literally, because he cut off all 4 of her limbs and left her alive to think about it. She survived long enough to make it to a hospital, where then she died days later from infection. Let me walk you through what this means pain-wise. Art sawed or chopped through her shoulders and hips, severing arms and legs completely. Each amputation tears through muscles, breaks bones, and cuts thousands of nerve endings all at once. Your body registers this as catastrophic damage and floods your system with stress hormones. But here's the kicker. She didn't die from the amputations. Somehow, she stayed conscious long enough for someone to find her and get her medical help. Picture lying there as a torso with stumps, fully aware that your arms and legs are gone forever and bleeding from 4 major wounds. Even with hospital care, the phantom pain would have been incredible. Your brain keeps sending signals to limbs that aren't there anymore, creating pain in a body part that you don't even have anymore. Each nerve ending at the amputation sites would be throbbing constantly. Then infection sets in and sepsis makes your whole body ache with fever while your organs start shutting down one by one. She probably spent her last days delirious with pain and fever, knowing she was dying slowly from complications of what Art did to her. Most people in this franchise luckily die within minutes, but this woman suffered for days before her body finally gave up fighting. Now, let's move on to Mia Carpenter from Terrifier 3. Now, this is a messed up scene too. This is probably the most disturbing death in the 3rd movie. True crime broadcaster, college student, and annoying Mia thought studying art would make for good content before she became content herself when Art turned her into a chainsaw demonstration with her boyfriend. Art started by slashing Mia up with the chainsaw. Cuts across her face, arms, and chest that weren't meant to kill, but just to cause pain and terror. Each slice would have been opening her skin and hit nerve clusters, making her entire upper body scream with flesh wounds. Blood was flowing from multiple cuts while she was trying to fight back. Then Art fired up the chainsaw and just went to work cutting her up. Now, chainsaws do not make clean cuts. They tear and rip through whatever they hit, so Mia would have been feeling that motorized blade shoot through her flesh and bones, vibrating her entire body with pain as it worked. And the worst part, she stayed conscious while she was being cut apart. Now, I did say that Mia's death is the worst in this movie, but I was more meaning this scene is the worst because we gotta talk about her boyfriend, Cole. Cole wins the prize for the most violated death in this entire series because Art decided that regular bisection was not created enough, so he took a different approach with the chainsaw entry point. Art shoved the chainsaw up his ass, directly up there, and just cut him in half. Imagine having a motorized saw blade punch through like that area. I mean, Taco Bell is already a motorized saw for me, if you get what I mean. Imagine a real one. The chainsaw then worked upward through his body, partially cutting through one of his legs while simultaneously sawing through his intestines and internal organs. And we know that he was alive during this because we can see him groaning in pain as it happens. Cole was getting dismembered from the inside out, just feeling that chainsaw tear through his abdomen. The upward sawing motion would have meant that Cole experienced his torture in stages. First, the genital mutilation, then the blade working through his lower intestines, and his upper abdomen getting opened up. Each inch the chainsaw traveled would have brought fresh trauma to new parts of his body. Cole also had to watch this happen to himself because he was positioned where he could see Art do this. Yeah, well, this is an incredibly personal, incredibly degrading. The sound design in this scene alone is enough to give you nightmares. Now let's move on to the next death that you all remember, and one that really put Art the Clown on the map. Dawn Emerson from Terrifier 1. Dawn gets hung upside down naked and then is sawed in half vertically with a hand-powered hacksaw. This is like the gold standard for cinematic torture, except it's not, because it gets even worse. We're not even done the video yet. Art started cutting Dawn's groin and worked his way down through her entire body to her head. Being upside down means her blood flow to her brain stayed strong, keeping her conscious way longer than she should have been. She would have felt that saw blade in her most sensitive area first, and then slowly work its way through her pelvis. The hacksaw moved back and forth, tearing through flesh and bone inch by inch. Dawn experienced every single stroke as the blade separated her bones and moved to her abdomen. Her internal organs got bisected while she watched, screaming and struggling against her restraints. Art then kept sawing through her rib cage, breaking each rib individually as the blade worked towards her chest. Dawn was still alive and aware though as the saw reached her heart and lungs. The movie makes it very, very clear that she does not die until the very end of the process. Her friend Tara had to watch the entire thing happen, which just adds another psychological level to the whole thing. Dawn knew that someone was witnessing this whole thing and there was nothing that they could do to help her. This death literally takes several minutes on screen and probably felt like hours to Dawn. Every stroke of that hacksaw would have sent fresh torture through her body while she stayed conscious enough to feel it all. It is one of the most messed up deaths I have ever seen on a movie screen. Somehow it's still not the worst because we are approaching the end now, and now we need to talk about Jessica Shaw's death from Terrifier 3. Jessica's death represents art's most creative torture yet, because this isn't just murder. It's performance art designed around maximum suffering and horror. Art and possessed Vicky tie Jessica to a chair and then hammer a plastic tube down her throat. Just getting that tube forced down would trigger her gag reflex and make her feel like she was choking. Her throat gets visibly very damaged from the violent insertion, and she can't breathe properly with that thing jammed in her airway. But then comes the nightmare fuel, because they use a blowtorch to drive living rats into the tube, forcing them down into Jessica's body. She would feel those rats scrambling and clawing their way down her throat into her stomach. Every scratch from their claws would be hitting nerve endings in her esophagus. Every bite they take trying to escape tears at her internal tissue. The rats are panicking and trying to claw their way out, and you can see this because you can see her throat just like bulge, which means that they are trying to shed open her internal organs from the inside out. So she would be choking on blood and rat fur while creatures literally eat their way through her body cavity trying to escape. Finally, Art slits her throat open to let the rats out. But this is not a mercy kill. It's the finale of his torture show because he did this to scare Sienna. The reason why this is so artsy, good pun, is literally just to make Sienna that much more scared. And all of that brings us to the single most disturbing and painful death in the entire franchise. Allie Thompson, you knew this was coming. You knew this was coming. Obviously, you knew this was coming. This is literally pouring salt on the wound. Here we are. The #1 spot goes to 16-year-old Allie, who experienced what can only be described as every type of pain the human body can register, all layered on top of each other in one very long nightmare sequence. Art starts by slicing Allie's eye open with a scalpel. The eyeball bursts like a water balloon, sending fluid down her face while her optical nerves scream. But that is just the warm-up, people. Next, Art uses scissors to cut the skin off the top of her head, scalping her completely. Thousands of nerve endings in her scalp would have been severed at once while cold air hits her exposed skull. You know that like feeling after you brush your teeth with mint and then you take a sip of really cold water? That on your head times a million. That's how much pain. He then slashes her back open, creating a deep gash that exposes muscle and possibly scrapes bone. But then comes the real horror. This Art grabs one of her arms and just rips it off her body. Why not? Every tendon, muscle, and nerve connection would be teared apart at the same time. The other arm gets partially severed. Art cuts it lengthwise, filleting it without removing entirely, which is two extremely different types of limb trauma, and they're both excruciatingly painful. Somehow, Allie survives all this. There's like a theory that Art can keep his victims alive so they can experience the most amount of pain possible, which kind of makes sense at this point based on some of the last deaths that we talked about. But anyways, she's still alive. She is lying there, mutilated as hell, trying to crawl away, and she is calling for her mom. But Art returns with household chemicals. He pours bleach over her open wounds, scalp, arm stumps, back gash, and creates chemical burns on top of physical trauma. Then he rubs handfuls of salt into every wound. Finally, he stabs her repeatedly to end it. But it doesn't end because her mom walks in later and she moves. She's still alive. Messed up. Look, if you made it through this entire video, congratulations. You're either a dedicated horror fan or I need to call the cops on you. I actually have a therapy session booked after I'm done filming this video so that I can just like desensitize my brain. Anyways, this was a very long video for me to make. So if you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Because if you want very long videos like this, I need to know that people want to see them. Also, feel free to hit the hype button as it really helps these type of videos get shown to more people. And if you'd like to watch another one of my videos right now, you can click the video on screen.